Hello everyone, the rest of Aquarimax Pets here with 4 types of Porcellio ornatus. Now I didn't say morphs because this is a mix of localities and morphs. Just wanted to do a little bit of a dive into the 4 types of this species that I keep. First, we're going to take a look at Porcellio ornatus yellow dot. Porcellio ornatus yellow dot goes by various names. It's also known as gold dot, south, dark south. There are probably several other names as well. And it can be recognized by the fact that it has the typical gray isopod body, slight skirting, not too pronounced, and then in the rear of the body, on the rear part of the pleon and on the perion, there are some gold dots or yellow dots. They're not the most ornate of the ornatus. There are actually many different types of ornatus, many localities and morphs of ornatus. Many of those localities are not seen in the US hobby, but they exist in Spain. But anyway, this was one of the first to get here to the US. Tends to be quite bold. It's easy to take care of. It is dimorphic in that the males tend to have visibly longer uropods. It's not the biggest ornatus, but it's a fun one to have because it's quite bold. Will take food from your fingers. I actually made a video about that, about isopods taking food from your fingers, and this was one of the best candidates for that kind of thing. So let's move on to another form of Porcellio ornatus. And here is another locality. This is Porcellio ornatus nord. Now, a locality is basically a population that is geographically distinct from other populations and also phenotypically distinct from other populations. In other words, it lives somewhere else and looks different. So this particular locality has some really interesting features to it. If you'll notice, it has a very pronounced skirt, and the skirt has sort of a scalloped or serrated look to it, which I think is really attractive. And then, of course, it also has these very bright spots all along the dorsal area, all along the perion and the pleon, in contrast to the yellow dot, which has much smaller dots just in the rear of the body. They look a little bit like Porcellio hasi. The markings are not as yellow as they are in hasi, but kind of a similar effect. They also don't have as much dimorphism in that the difference in the uropods between the males and the females is not nearly as pronounced in these as it is in hasi, where it's quite extreme. They are, of course, in the same genus, so they have some similarities. I really like this particular locality. It might be one of my favorites, and I've had this type for quite a long time. They're breeding fairly well. You can see there's a youngster in there with 3 more or less adults. Very fun one. They, according to some sources, like Scott Maroney from Finger Lakes Feeder says these get larger for him than any of the other Porcellio ornatus. And this is Porcellio ornatus high yellow. Now, there are localities in the wild that have a fair amount of yellow on them, but this locality has been selectively bred for even more yellow, so that's where we get specimens like this. And there are some that have even more yellow coverage than this, and I've seen some that are almost all yellow. There's actually one that's sort of obscured by the others that has a very high proportion of yellow, and it's kind of washing out on the camera when you can see it. But it's probably something close to 80% yellow there. I actually prefer it when there's a lot of contrast, so a lot of yellow coverage, but also a lot of the dark coverage. There's a form of this locality that is now a morph, I guess, because it's called Porcellio ornatus chocolate, and it's been selectively bred for kind of a hypomelanism where some of the contrast is taken away because it's more of a chocolatey brown than this sort of dark gray. And this is my preferred form here. But both of them are attractive isopods. These are, in my experience, possibly the most picky, in other words, the least hardy of all of them, and perhaps the least bold as well. But I have had a colony. I've had some partial die-offs here and there with the colony and have added new stock to it a couple of times. But I've never lost the colony entirely, but I do feel like they're a little bit more picky than some of the others. And before I move on to the last Porcellio ornatus type that I want to show to you today. I just want to give a quick shout out to my patrons at Patreon. And at the end of the video, you'll see a list of all of my patrons. I really appreciate all that you do, patrons. Thank you so much for your support. I couldn't do it without you. And now on to the next and final Porcellio ornatus. These beauties here are Porcellio ornatus Witches Brew. They're descended from Porcellio ornatus high yellow, but they are a mutation that reduces a lot of the dark pigment in a pied formation, or a Dalmatian style of mutation, similar to Magic Potion. And of course, that's where the name Witches Brew comes from, in that they have a very similar mutation to the Armadillidium vulgare mutation that leads to the pied form, but also they have had selective breeding for the yellow markings, which is also true of the true or American line Magic Potions. I think these are absolutely gorgeous. Often when there is a morph that is produced that causes a species to lose contrast or lose pigmentation, I'm not always a fan of it, but I am a fan of it in this case, like I am with the Magic Potions. I think it looks really amazing. I've had these since October of 21. They've been doing well for me. They've been breeding well. They actually seem bolder, if anything, than the high yellows from which they are descended, which I think is a plus. Really, really fascinating isopod. Which of these 4 Porcellio ornatus is your favorite? And do you have another Porcellio ornatus locality or morph that you like even better? Please let me know what you think down in the comments, and thanks for watching. I post videos every Friday with live streams on Wednesdays, all on aquarium and vivarium pets. Please feel free to share, rate, comment, and if you haven't already, subscribe. And then tap the bell for all notifications so you don't miss my next video.